For any fan of the F-15 Eagle, the question isn't just if you should fly it, but which one. Your two main choices are the simplified but polished F-15C in DCS world and the Deep Systems heavy mod for Falcon BMS. But which one feels right? Which one flies like the real thing? And which one deserves a spot in your hangar? Today I'm putting them through their paces. I'm going to break down everything from the graphics and flight models to the avionics, weapons, and the overall feel. My goal is to give you all the info you need to decide which Eagle fits your needs. And hey, if you find this kind of video helpful, hitting that like button and subscribing really does help the channel out tremendously. It lets me know you want more content like this. So thank you for your support. Now let's get to it. When you strip away the switches and screens, what remains is how the jet feels to fly. At a fundamental level, these two simulations feel remarkably similar, but their true characters diverge when you push the aircraft to its limits. Let's start with DCS. The F-15C here benefits from what Eagle Dynamics calls a professional flight model, or PFM. This is the same high-fidelity physics-based engine used in their most expensive modules, and is solely focused on replicating the real aircraft's flight dynamics. In practice, this gives you a truly excellent sense of the Eagle's raw performance. You quickly learn its corner speed, that sweet spot for turning. Push it too hard, and you bleed energy dramatically, just like the real jet. It feels powerful yet heavy, agile but demanding of careful management. The key takeaway is that the simplification in DCS is in the cockpit systems, not in the flight dynamics. Now let's contrast that with Falcon BMS. Here, the F-15C's flight model is built into the broader BMS ecosystem, which was historically centered on the F-16. It's crucial to acknowledge the incredible work the volunteer team has done to make the Eagle feel distinct. It's a dedicated and acknowledged work in progress. You feel this philosophy immediately. It requires constant manual trimming, which is accurate for this non-fly-by-wire jet. However, user feedback and my own testing indicates that certain finer points, like rudder control and high AOA behavior, are still being refined. But then again, I'm no flight dynamics expert, so please keep that in mind. So how do these different philosophies translate into actual performance? Since both simulations model the same airframe, you'd expect similarities. In areas like takeoff, acceleration, sustained level turns, energy bleed during maneuvers, and steep climbs, the two modules demonstrate comparable performance. On paper, the numerical differences often seem negligible. To confirm this, I ran a few tests. As you can see on screen, in a level turn at 10,000 feet and 350 knots, pulling 3 to 4 Gs, the results were strikingly similar. The turn radius, turn rate, and the amount of speed they bled was very close.
Altitude.
In another test, a 70-degree steep climb from 10,000 to 40,000 feet with full afterburner, the DCS F-15 reached the target altitude slightly faster, but the difference was almost negligible. This brings us to the critical question: which one is more realistic? Without a real F-15 pilot in the seat, it's hard to say definitively, but we can assess accuracy. The DCS PFM has a long-standing reputation for its polished, dedicated aerodynamics. The BMS model demonstrates compelling performance, but is still in active development. So what's the final verdict? If your top priority is the most polished and aerodynamically rigorous simulation of the F-15's flight characteristics, the DCS module currently holds the edge. However, the BMS version is a formidable and rapidly evolving simulation that already delivers a highly engaging and distinct flying experience. Before I jump to the next section, let's push these jets even further and see what happens at their absolute limits, specifically with stalls and departures, which is when the jet stops flying smoothly and starts to spin. This is another area where the core philosophy of each simulator really comes through. In DCS, with its professional flight model, the F-15C is actually quite hard to get into trouble. It gives you really strong physical cues like airframe shaking or buffet as you approach your stall. And if you do stall it, the jet tends to behave predictably, dropping its nose to recover a relatively gentle way. As I tried to push it out of the safety envelope, it almost felt like trying to correct itself automatically, effectively making it almost impossible to make the DCS F-15C actually spin, which I believe aligns well with the real jet's reputation for being a very stable airframe. But the real proof of the detailed flight model comes when things go completely wrong. I'll never forget one dogfight against an Su-27, where it blew my entire left wing off. I was going down, but the incredible thing was, I still had some control. I was wrestling with the stick, trying to fight back with only one wing. Just amazing. The level of aerodynamic modeling, simulating control from a mangled airframe, is something I haven't experienced to that degree elsewhere. It really shows you the depth of the DCS PFM. Now in Falcon BMS, the experience is different. The F-15C here can feel a bit more twitchy at the very edge of its performance. And let me be clear for all the hardcore BMS fans out there. I mean only at the very edge, not throughout the entire flight envelope. The stall can be less forgiving and more abrupt, and it's generally easier to accidentally depart into a spin if you're rough on the controls. And while it's relatively easier to make it stall or spin than the DCS counterpart, it's also not that difficult to recover. Besides, when the jet's nose starts swinging too fast, the system screams at you, giving you a last-second chance to save it. So what's the final take? The DCS F-15C's overall resistance to spinning and its incredible damage modeling likely feel closer to the real rock-stable Eagle. On the other hand, the BMS version has a slightly sharper feel at the limit, but I personally think both flight models are fundamentally stable and highly capable. Both cockpits are incredibly detailed, with all the switches, knobs, and buttons you'd expect, and they both got a nice worn-in look, so it doesn't feel like you're flying a jet fresh off the production line. But when you really lean in, the difference becomes clear. The BMS version, in my opinion, has textures with more depth. The weathering is more pronounced, with more variation in the materials, and even small details like scratch marks and subtle stains. It just feels more lived in. And that feeling of being in the jet is a much sharper contrast. The BMS version includes a full pilot body inside the cockpit, while the DCS version doesn't. For pure cockpit immersion, I think that's quite a difference. Moving to the external models, they are both very good. But again, the details separate them. The pilot model you see from the outside looks more detailed in BMS to my eyes. More importantly, the BMS model features wing flex animation and visible vortex trails over the wings during high-G maneuvers. These are small details that make the jet feel alive and physical. The DCS version lacks these animations, which is a noticeable omission once you have seen them. However, I personally think the DCS version's airframe texture look more vivid and detailed. Another thing I noticed is that the landing gear retracts faster in the BMS version, though I can't say which one is closer to the real thing. Now, let me show you the 3D models of both F-15 side by side, so you can see it for yourselves and be the final judge. Let's briefly compare the soundscape for each module. Grading sound quality is inherently subjective, and personal preference will always play a major role. Therefore, it's best to listen for yourself and decide. That said, one objective difference is clear. The DCS F-15 generally features a wider dynamic range and higher overall volume levels than its BMS counterpart. This is a technical characteristic, distinct from quality that you can hear for yourself. This is where they fundamentally diverge. The DCS F-15C is what we call low fidelity. You get a fully functional cockpit, but you can't actually click on any switches, knobs, or buttons. All the systems are simplified under the hood. The BMS F-15C, however, is of high fidelity or full fidelity mod in progress. They are working toward modeling every system, the hydraulics, electrical, fuel, and sensors, in depth. Right now, it's a mixed bag. Some systems are already more complex than DCS, while others are still being developed. In a sense, you could call it an early access release. The cold and dark start is a perfect example. In DCS, you can start up with just a couple of keybinds. In BMS, you need to go through the full proper startup procedure to wake the jet up. The same philosophy applies to weapons employment too. So if you care about following procedures, having a clickable cockpit, and that deep systems management, BMS is the one to watch. As for the radar, the DCS F-15C uses a simplified AN APG-63 radar. The modes are straightforward, and in dogfight modes, it automatically acquires targets for you. I mean almost. It's designed for accessibility. The BMS F-15C models are more detailed AN APG-63, though it's also a work in progress. The key advantage is the fully functional L16 data link, giving you a massive situational awareness boost on your displays, something DCS completely lacks. Also, I found that the BMS HUD shows more detailed info. It's also worth mentioning that Eagle Dynamics announced a while ago they are working on a full fidelity F-15C. It clearly shows the direction things are moving, and it'll be fascinating to see how the BMS version evolves by the time we get the full fidelity Eagle in DCS. I'll make sure to do a full side-by-side comparison when the time comes. Now, let's talk about what hangs on the pylons. When you look at the air-to-air weapons, the two modules are actually very close. Both the DCS and BMS F-15C are equipped with the same core arsenal. The AIM-9 Sidewinder for close-range combat, the AIM-7 Sparrow for medium range, and both the AIM-120B and AIM-120C AMRAAMs for long-range fights. Where BMS has a technical advantage is with the AIM-9X missile, which is a selectable weapon on the loadout screen. However, the JHMCS helmet system you need to actually aim the missile off foresight isn't implemented yet. So in practice, you're basically using the AIM-9X as a more sensitive Sidewinder, but you lose its game-changing look-and-shoot capability. The other key difference is in their secondary role. The DCS F-15C is a pure air superiority fighter. It has no air-to-ground capability whatsoever. The BMS F-15C, however, does have basic work-in-progress support for unguided bombs like the Mach 82 and Mach 84. Now, I'll be honest, in my testing, this feature feels very much like a placeholder. I tried dropping them a few times and didn't have much success. It doesn't seem to work exactly as it should just yet. So other than those specific points, The weapons you can actually use effectively in combat are almost identical between the two. It's really in the air-to-ground department where BMS shows a nascent motor ability, even though it's not fully realized. This is the final and perhaps most important layer. The DCS F-15C is a masterpiece of accessible realism. You get a world-class flight model in a stunning plug-and-play sandbox, equipped with cutting-edge weapons. You can jump into a quick dogfight and dominate the merge with modern technology. The Falcon BMS F-15C is a part of an ecosystem. You're not just flying, you're a pilot in a living, breathing war. The complex radar, the invaluable data link, and the unparalleled dynamic campaign create a strategic depth that no other simulator can match. You trade easy for depth. So which Eagle should you fly? The choice is now stark and clear. Choose the DCS version if your top priority is the most polished and aerodynamically accurate flight model, and you want a visual stunning, accessible experience that delivers a world-class feeling of flying and fighting the Eagle, without the complexity of deep systems management. Choose the Falcon BMS F-15C if you want to be a combat pilot in a dynamic war. You value deep systems simulation, a functional data link, and a strategic campaign over having the most advanced missiles. In the end, DCS satisfies the purist who wants to feel the airplane, while BMS fulfills their dream of being a tactical aviator in a real persistent war. Personally, that strategic depth is what pulls me in. I've come to prefer the immersion of a clickable cockpit and the weight of a dynamic campaign. So for me, BMS is where I live as far as F-15C is concerned. But your choice ultimately comes down to what you want to be: a virtuoso pilot in a stunning sandbox, or a combat aviator in a living world. Or better yet, why not try them both and see which one wins you over? Hope you enjoyed the video and let me know what you think. Which one do you prefer to fly, and why? Let me know in the comments. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and I'll see you in the skies.